The sound of breaking glass shattered the early morning quiet of the Silver Star Saloon, followed by a woman's cry of pain that made every man at the bar turn his head away in practiced indifference. Dinah Kane wiped his hands on his dusty chaps and felt his jaw tighten, watching through the window as Morris Foster stumbled backward out the kitchen door, cradling her bleeding hand against her chest, while the saloon owner's wife shrieked obscenities after her. It was September 1882 in Cherry Creek, Nevada, and the mining town had grown prosperous enough to develop the same cruel social distinctions that plagued cities back east, with serving girls like Morris occupying the lowest rung of respectable society. Dinah had been watching Morris for 3 months now, ever since he'd ridden into Cherry Creek with a herd of cattle bound for the railhead. He'd stayed on, taking work at the Double J Ranch just outside town, telling himself it was the good pay and the decent foreman, but he knew the truth every time he found an excuse to ride into town and catch a glimpse of the dark-haired girl who worked herself to exhaustion for people who treated her like she was less than human. She was small and thin, with expressive brown eyes that seemed too large for her face and a quiet dignity that persisted despite the constant barrage of insults and casual cruelty she endured daily. He crossed the dusty street without conscious thought, his boots kicking up little clouds of Nevada dust that hung in the still morning air. Morris had sunk down onto the back steps of the saloon, examining her palm where a deep cut from the broken glass was bleeding freely. She didn't look up when his shadow fell across her, just kept pressing her other hand against the wound with the weary resignation of someone used to injuries being part of her day. "Let me see that," Dinah said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. Morris jerked her head up, startled, and he saw the instant wariness in her eyes. She was maybe 22 or 23, he guessed, though the hardness of her life made it difficult to tell. "It's nothing, sir. I need to get back to work. You're bleeding all over yourself." "That needs proper tending." He crouched down beside her, pulling the clean handkerchief from his vest pocket. "I'm Dinah Kane. Work out at the Double J. I know who you are." Her voice was soft, with a slight tremor that might have been pain or fear or simply exhaustion. "Everyone knows the Cowboys." He took her hand gently, ignoring her flinch, and examined the cut. It was deep enough to need stitches, running diagonally across her palm. "This happened because she threw something at you." Morris tried to pull her hand back, but he held it firmly, wrapping the handkerchief around it with practiced efficiency. "It was my fault. I was too slow bringing up the clean glasses from the cellar. Mrs. Henderson has every right to expect better service." "Mrs. Henderson threw a glass at you hard enough to shatter and cut you this deep, and you're defending her." Dinah finished tying off the makeshift bandage and looked up to meet Morris's eyes. They were rich brown, almost amber in the morning sunlight, and filled with a bone-deep weariness that made something in his chest ache. "What else can I do?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "I need this position. There's nowhere else in Cherry Creek that will hire me." Dinah stood up, offering his hand to help her to her feet. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, and he was struck by how small and cold her fingers felt in his. She swayed slightly when she stood, and he realized she probably hadn't eaten yet this morning. Hell, she probably hadn't eaten much yesterday either, if he was reading the situation correctly. "Come with me," he said, keeping his voice gentle but brooking no argument. "Doc Henderson's office is just down the street. That needs proper stitching. I can't afford the doctor." Morris pulled her hand free, wrapping her arms around herself defensively. "And I need to get back to work before Mrs. Henderson docks my wages even more. I'll pay for the doctor." Dinah could see the refusal forming on her lips and added quickly, "Consider it a loan, if that makes you feel better about it." But that cut's going to fester if it doesn't get proper treatment, and then you'll really be unable to work." The logic of his argument seemed to reach her where kindness couldn't. She nodded slowly, defeat written in every line of her thin frame. "All right, but I am paying you back, Mr. Kane. I don't take charity." "Dinah," he corrected, falling into step beside her as they walked down the dusty main street of Cherry Creek. "And I never thought you did." The morning sun was climbing higher in the cloudless Nevada sky, promising another scorching day. Cherry Creek sat in a valley between low, scrub-covered hills, and the heat seemed to gather and intensify in the bowl of the landscape. The town had sprung up 5 years earlier, when silver was discovered in the surrounding hills, and it still had the ramshackle, temporary feeling of a mining settlement, despite the attempts of some residents to impose Eastern refinement on the frontier. Doc Henderson's office occupied the ground floor of a neat wooden building on the corner of Main Street and Silver Avenue. The doctor himself was no relation to the saloon owner's wife, a fact for which Dinah was grateful as he ushered Morris through the door. The old man looked up from the medical journal he'd been reading and immediately focused on the blood-soaked handkerchief wrapped around Morris's hand. "What happened here?" Doc Henderson was already moving to clear space on his examination table, gesturing for Morris to sit. "Accident at the saloon," Morris said quickly, before Dinah could speak. "Broke a glass and cut myself on the pieces." The doctor shot Dinah a knowing look but didn't contradict her story. He'd been practicing medicine in mining towns for 30 years and knew when to ask questions and when to keep his mouth shut. He unwrapped the handkerchief carefully, examining the wound with professional detachment. "Going to need 5 or 6 stitches," he announced. "You're lucky it didn't cut any tendons. Going to hurt some while I work on it." Morris just nodded, her face pale but composed. Dinah found himself admiring her quiet courage as the doctor prepared his needle and catgut thread. She didn't cry out once during the stitching, though he could see her free hand gripping the edge of the examination table, so hard her knuckles went white. When it was done, and Doc Henderson was wrapping clean bandages around her palm, Dinah paid the $2 for the treatment and added another $1 for a bottle of laudanum in case the pain got too bad. "Thank you," Morris said as they stepped back out into the bright Nevada sunlight. She held the bottle of laudanum carefully in her good hand, looking at it like it was something precious and foreign. "I'll pay you back. $3, right? It might take me a few weeks, but I will. No hurry." Dinah studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way she seemed to be holding herself together through sheer force of will. "Have you eaten anything today?" She shook her head. "I usually eat after the lunch service, when there are scraps from the kitchen." The casual way she said it, like eating once a day from leftover scraps, was perfectly normal, made anger flare hot in Dinah's chest. He kept it off his face, knowing it would only alarm her. "Come on then. Betty's Cafe makes a decent breakfast and you're in no shape to go back to work yet anyway." "I really shouldn't." But even as she protested, her eyes drifted toward the cafe down the street and he could see the hunger in them. "Doctor's orders," Dinah said firmly, offering his arm. "You need food in you or you're liable to faint, and that won't do that hand any good." This time she didn't argue, just fell into step beside him. They drew stairs as they walked to the cafe together, a cowboy and a serving girl in blood-stained clothes. Dinah could see the calculation and disapproval in the eyes of the respectable women they passed, the knowing looks from the men. He met every gaze steadily until they looked away, his hand resting protectively on the small of Morris's back. Betty's Cafe was a small establishment run by a widow woman who'd come west with her husband during the first silver rush. Betty herself looked up from the counter as they entered, her weathered face breaking into a smile when she recognized Dinah. "Morning, Dinah. Take any table you like." Her eyes moved to Morris, and he saw the moment of assessment, but Betty had always been kinder than most. "What happened to your hand, honey?" "Just an accident," Morris said softly, sliding into the chair Dinah held out for her at a corner table. "Nothing serious." "Looks serious enough to me." Betty brought over 2 cups of coffee without being asked. "I'll get you both the full breakfast. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy." "Sound good." "Sounds perfect," Dinah confirmed, adding sugar to his coffee. He waited until Betty had bustled back to the kitchen before speaking again. "How long have you been working at the Silver Star?" Morris wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, seeming to draw comfort from the warmth despite the heat of the day. 2 years. I came to Cherry Creek in 1880, just after my father died. He'd been working one of the smaller claims up in the hills, but it never paid out the way he hoped. "No other family?" She shook her head. "My mother died when I was 15. It was just me and my father after that. He was a good man, just unlucky. When he died, I had to find work fast. The Silver Star was the only place that would hire me." She took a sip of coffee, and he saw her hands shaking slightly. "It's not much, but it's a roof over my head and enough money to get by." "They let you sleep there?" Dinah already knew the answer from the way she'd said it, the resignation in her voice. "In a storage room off the kitchen. It's small, but it's mine." Morris looked up at him, and he saw the defensive pride in her eyes. "I know what people think of girls who work in saloons, but I'm not one of the girls upstairs, Mr. Kane. I'm just a serving girl and a cleaning woman. I work honest." "I never thought otherwise," Dinah said quietly. "And I asked you to call me Dinah." Betty arrived with their breakfasts before Morris could respond, setting down plates heaping with food. Dinah watched as Morris stared at her plate like she couldn't quite believe it was real. She picked up her fork awkwardly with her injured hand, wincing at the pain. "Use your other hand," he suggested gently. "Nobody here is going to judge your table manners." She switched the fork to her left hand and took a small, careful bite of eggs. He saw her eyes close for just a moment, savoring the taste, and realized this might be the first hot meal she'd had in days, maybe weeks. They ate in companionable silence, Dinah deliberately taking his time so she wouldn't feel rushed or watched. When she'd cleaned her plate, mopping up the last of the gravy with a biscuit, Morris sat back with a small sigh. There was color in her cheeks now, and her eyes seemed brighter, less haunted. "Thank you. I can't remember the last time I had a meal like that." "You should have 3 meals a day like that," Dinah said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Working as hard as you do doesn't mean much out here." Morris's smile was sad but genuine. "But I appreciate the kindness more than I can say. How much do I owe you for breakfast?" "Nothing. This was my invitation." He poured them both more coffee from the pot Betty had left on the table. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded warily. "Why do you stay? You're smart, you work hard." "There must be other opportunities in Cherry Creek, or you could move to Carson City or even Sacramento. Why stay somewhere that treats you so poorly?" Morris looked down at her bandaged hand, turning it slowly as she considered her answer. "Because leaving takes money I don't have. Mrs. Henderson pays me $3 a week, and she deducts for my room and board. By the time I've paid for anything else I need, there's nothing left to save. I've been trying for 2 years, but something always comes up. I get sick, or I need new shoes, or they dock my pay because I broke something." She met his eyes, and he saw the quiet desperation in hers. "I'm trapped here, Dinah, and I don't know how to get out." The simple honesty of her admission hit him harder than any dramatic plea could have. She wasn't asking him for help, wasn't trying to manipulate his sympathy. She was just stating facts, the reality of her situation laid out as plainly as the empty plates between them. "What if you didn't have to get out alone?" The words were out of his mouth before he'd fully thought them through, but once he'd said them, Dinah realized he meant them completely. Morris frowned, confused. "I don't understand. Marry me." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table between them. "I know it sounds crazy, we barely know each other. But I've been watching you for months now, and I've seen how hard you work, how much strength and dignity you have even when people treat you like dirt. I have a good job at the Double J, and I've saved most of my pay. I've been thinking about starting my own place, maybe buying one of the smaller ranches that's come up for sale. I need a partner, someone who isn't afraid of hard work, and you need a way out of the Silver Star." Morris stared at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. "You're asking me to marry you. We've only spoken a handful of times. I know, but think about it practically. You'd have security, a real home, enough food to eat. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm offering you a partnership, a business arrangement if that's how you want to think about it. You'd run the household and I'd work the land. We'd build something together. Why would you do this?" Her voice was barely audible. "You could marry any number of respectable women in Cherry Creek. Why would you saddle yourself with someone like me?" Dinah reached across the table and took her good hand in both of his, feeling the calluses on her fingers from hard labor. "Because respectable women in Cherry Creek don't know the meaning of real work. They wouldn't survive a week doing what you do every day. I don't want some delicate flower who needs to be taken care of. I want a partner who's as tough as this land requires. And because every time I see the way people treat you, it makes me want to punch something. You deserve better, Morris. Let me give you better." She pulled her hand back, pressing both palms flat against her cheeks. He could see her thinking, weighing, calculating odds. "This is insane." "Maybe, but is it any more insane than spending the rest of your life sleeping in a storage room and eating scraps?" Morris let out a shaky breath that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "If I said yes, if I actually agreed to this mad proposal, when would you want to do it? Today?" Dinah said it firmly, decisively. "Right now, if you're willing. We can go see Reverend Matthews, get it done properly and legal. Then I'll take you out to the ranch, get you settled. You'll never have to go back to the Silver Star except to collect whatever belongings you want to keep. You're serious?" It wasn't a question. Completely serious. Morris looked at him for a long moment, and Dinah held still under her scrutiny, letting her see whatever she needed to see. Finally, she nodded slowly. "All right. Yes, I'll marry you, Dinah Kane. God help us both, but yes." Relief and something that felt surprisingly like joy flooded through him. He stood up, pulling out his wallet to leave money on the table for Betty. "Let's go see the Reverend then." They walked side by side through Cherry Creek's dusty streets toward the small white church at the east end of town. Word was already spreading. Dinah could see it in the way people stopped to stare and whisper behind their hands. By the time they reached the church, he could feel Morris trembling slightly beside him. Though whether from fear or excitement or simple shock, he couldn't tell. Reverend Matthews was in his study when they knocked. A thin man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked surprised to see them together, but listened without interrupting as Dinah explained what they wanted. "Marriage is a sacred commitment," the Reverend said carefully when Dinah had finished. "Not something to be entered into lightly or hastily. Perhaps you two should take some time, get to know each other properly. With respect, Reverend, we've made our decision." Dinah kept his voice level but firm. "Morris needs to be out of her current situation, and I'm offering her an honorable solution. We're both adults, both of sound mind. Will you marry us or not?" Reverend Matthews looked at Morris. "Is this truly what you want, my dear?" You're not being coerced." Morris lifted her chin, and Dinah saw that quiet dignity shine through again. "It's what I want. Dinah is offering me a chance at a real life. I'd be a fool to turn that down." "Very well, then." The Reverend stood, reaching for his prayer book. "We'll need witnesses. Let me fetch Mrs. Matthews and our housekeeper." The ceremony was simple and quick, conducted in the small chapel with afternoon sunlight streaming through the plain glass windows. Morris's voice shook when she said her vows, but she didn't hesitate. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them man and wife, Dinah leaned down and kissed her gently on the forehead, feeling her start of surprise at even that chaste contact. They signed the marriage certificate, and Dinah paid the Reverend's fee. As they walked back out into the bright Nevada afternoon, now legally husband and wife, Morris looked up at him with wide, slightly dazed eyes. "I can't quite believe that just happened." "Believe it." Dinah spotted the sheriff across the street and raised a hand in greeting, making sure the lawman saw them together, newly married. News would spread even faster now. "Let's go get your things from the Silver Star." Morris's face paled. "Mrs. Henderson is going to be furious." "Mrs. Henderson can be as furious as she likes. You don't work for her anymore." He took her elbow gently, steering her down the street. "You're Mrs. Kane now. Nobody in this town is going to treat you like dirt ever again." The Silver Star was busy with the lunch crowd when they entered through the front door instead of the back. Every head turned, conversation dying away as people took in the sight of the serving girl walking in on Dinah Kane's arm, head held high. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the kitchen, her face already flushing red with anger. "Where have you been?" she demanded, advancing on Morris. "You disappear for hours, leaving me short-handed, and then you have the nerve to walk in here like nothing's wrong." "Morris won't be coming back to work," Dinah said before his new wife could respond. "She's my wife now as of half an hour ago. We're just here to collect her belongings." The silence that fell over the saloon was absolute. Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her face going from red to purple. Finally, she found her voice. "Your wife. You married this worthless girl." "Watch your mouth," Dinah said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "That's my wife you're talking about, and I won't have her disrespected." "She's a serving girl," Mrs. Henderson sputtered. "Common as dirt. What respectable man marries someone like that? A man with enough sense to recognize quality when he sees it." Dinah kept his hand on Morris's back, feeling her rigid with tension. "Now, she has belongings in that storage room you've been charging her rent for. We'll collect them and be on our way." Morris led him through the kitchen, ignoring the stares of the other workers, to a door so small and unremarkable he'd walked past it a dozen times without noticing. The room beyond was barely bigger than a closet, with a narrow cot, a battered trunk, and a few hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. His anger at seeing where she'd been living must have shown on his face because Morris touched his arm gently. "It's all right. I had a place to sleep. That's more than some people have." "This isn't a place to sleep. This is a hole." But Dinah forced himself to speak calmly, focusing on the practical. "What do you want to take?" "Everything I own fits in that trunk." Morris knelt down, opening it with her good hand. Inside were a few changes of clothes, all worn and carefully mended, a hairbrush, a small bundle of letters tied with string, and a daguerreotype in a tarnished frame. She picked up the photograph tenderly, and Dinah saw it showed a younger Morris with an older man who must have been her father. "That's all." He couldn't keep the sadness from his voice. "It's enough." Morris closed the trunk, fastening the leather straps. "It's everything that matters." Dinah picked up the trunk easily, surprised by how light it was. They walked back through the kitchen, and he saw Morris pause at the doorway, looking back one last time at the place that had been her prison for 2 years. Then she turned away, stepping out into the afternoon sunlight beside him, and didn't look back again. He'd left his horse tied up at the hitching post outside the saloon, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Chester. Morris looked at the horse, then at the trunk, then at him with a slight frown. "How are we getting to the ranch? You're riding with me. The trunk can tie on behind the saddle." Dinah secured the trunk with practiced efficiency, then swung up into the saddle. He held his hand down to Morris. "Put your foot on mine and I'll pull you up." She hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. He hauled her up easily, settling her side saddle in front of him. She was light, almost too light, and he made a mental note to make sure she started eating properly. His arm circled her waist to hold the reins, and he felt her stiffen at the contact before gradually relaxing. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "Ready," she confirmed, and he turned Chester toward the road that led out of Cherry Creek toward the Double J Ranch. The ranch was 5 miles outside of town, situated where a spring-fed creek provided year-round water. The land was good for cattle, rolling hills covered in bunch grass and sage, with cottonwood trees marking the course of the creek. The main house was a solid structure of wood and stone, built to last by the ranch's founder 20 years earlier. Dinah boarded in the bunkhouse with the other hands, but he'd been saving his money with the dream of buying his own place someday. As they rode, Morris gradually relaxed against him, her head resting back against his shoulder. He could feel the exhaustion rolling off her now that the immediate crisis had passed, the adrenaline that had been keeping her going finally ebbing away. "Tell me about the Double J," she said quietly, her voice competing with the rhythmic sound of Chester's hooves on the packed dirt road. "Good outfit. Boss is John Jefferson, runs about 300 head of cattle. Fair man, pays on time, doesn't work his hands to death. I've been with him almost a year now. Started as just another cowhand, but he promoted me to assistant foreman last month." "Will he be upset about you getting married suddenly?" Dinah considered the question. "He might be surprised, but John's a practical man. He knows I've been wanting to start my own place. Might be he'll see this as me putting down roots, making a commitment to staying in the area." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon heat pressing down on them like a blanket. In the distance, Dinah could see dust rising where the main herd was grazing. As they approached the ranch buildings, he steered Chester toward the main house instead of the bunkhouse. John Jefferson was on the porch, going over accounts in a ledger book. He was a man in his early 40s, weathered by years of ranch work but still strong and capable. He looked up as they approached, his eyebrows rising in surprise when he saw Morris sitting in front of Dinah. "Afternoon, boss," Dinah called, reining Chester to a stop. "Got some news." John set down his ledger and stood up, his eyes moving between Dinah and Morris with open curiosity. "That's so. Got married this afternoon. John Jefferson, meet my wife, Morris Kane." The name felt right on his tongue, like it belonged there. To John's credit, he didn't let his surprise show for more than a moment. He stepped down from the porch, touching the brim of his hat politely to Morris. "Mrs. Kane, welcome to the Double J. This is certainly unexpected news, Dinah." "I know it's sudden." Dinah helped Morris slide down from the saddle, then dismounted himself. "We'll need to make some new arrangements. Can't exactly keep living in the bunkhouse now." John rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "No, I suppose you can't. There's the old foreman's cabin about a quarter-mile north of here. Been sitting empty since Tom retired last year. Needs some work, but it's sound. You're welcome to it if you want to fix it up." Relief flooded through Dinah. He'd been prepared to start looking for a place to rent in town if necessary, which would have eaten into his savings considerably. "That would be perfect, thank you. Consider it part of your pay, Lord knows you've earned it. John turned his attention back to Morris, his expression softening. You look about done in, Mrs. Kane. My wife Sarah is in the kitchen. Why don't you go introduce yourself while Dinah and I talk business? Morris glanced at Dinah, who nodded encouragingly. Go ahead. Sarah's good people. She'll make you feel welcome. He watched Morris walk toward the house, her shoulders squared with determination despite her obvious exhaustion. When she disappeared inside, John turned to him with a more serious expression. You want to tell me what this is really about? You've never mentioned courting anyone. It's not a conventional situation, Dinah admitted. Morris was working at the Silver Star in town, being treated badly, not much better than a slave. I've been watching her for months, and this morning things came to a head. Seemed like marriage was the best solution for both of us. John studied him for a long moment. You in love with her, I could be. Dinah said it honestly. Haven't known her long enough to say for sure, but I respect her and I want to help her. That seemed like enough to start with. Fair enough. John clapped him on the shoulder. For what it's worth, I think you did a decent thing. Take the rest of the day, get your wife settled. Tomorrow we'll ride out to that cabin, see what needs doing to make it livable. Appreciate it, boss. Dinah led Chester to the barn, unsaddling him and rubbing him down before heading to the main house himself. He found Morris in the kitchen with Sarah Jefferson, a capable woman in her late 30s with warm eyes and an easy smile. Sarah had Morris sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of cool water and a slice of fresh baked bread with butter. There you are, Sarah said when she saw Dinah. I was just getting acquainted with your bride. Congratulations on your marriage. Thank you. Dinah pulled out a chair and sat down next to Morris, noting that she'd already eaten the bread and looked less pale than before. John said we can use the old foreman's cabin. I'll take Morris out there now. Let her see it. I'll pack you a basket of food, Sarah said immediately, moving to the pantry. That cabin's been empty a while. You'll need supplies to get started. 10 minutes later, they were walking north along the creek, Chester following behind with Morris's trunk and a heavy basket of provisions. The cabin came into view as they rounded a bend, a small structure of logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. It was indeed in need of work, with broken windows and warped floorboards, but the bones were good and the roof looked sound. Morris stood in front of it, her hand shading her eyes from the late afternoon sun. It's wonderful, she said softly. Dinah looked at the rundown cabin with its peeling wood and overgrown yard. It needs a lot of work. It's mine, ours. She turned to him, and he saw tears shining in her eyes. I haven't had a real home since my father died. This is wonderful, Dinah. I don't care how much work it needs. Something tight and hard in his chest loosened at her words. He reached out and wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek with his thumb. Then we'll make it into a proper home together. Come on, let's see the inside. The cabin consisted of 2 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen space and a smaller bedroom. The furniture was sparse but serviceable, a table and chairs, a wood stove, a bedstead with a thin mattress. Everything was covered in dust and debris from months of neglect, but Morris moved through the space with growing excitement, already planning and organizing in her mind. The windows need replacing, and that table leg is broken, she said, touching things gently with her good hand. But the stove looks good, and this floor just needs scrubbing. I can make curtains from flour sacks if I can get some dye. And we'll need more furniture eventually, but this is a good start. Dinah watched her transform before his eyes, exhaustion replaced by enthusiasm as she envisioned their home. We'll work on it together. I'm handy enough with carpentry, and Sarah mentioned she has some spare furniture in storage we can have. Morris turned to him, and the smile on her face was luminous. Thank you. Thank you for this, for all of it. I promise I'll work hard. You won't regret marrying me. I already don't regret it. He said it simply, meaning it completely. Come on, let's get that food Sarah packed inside before the heat spoils it. Then we can start making this place livable. They worked together through the evening, sweeping out debris and cobwebs, washing windows and surfaces, unpacking the basket Sarah had sent. She'd included bread, butter, jam, cheese, cold chicken, fresh vegetables, coffee, and even a small cake. Morris set the food carefully in the cabinet, treating each item like treasure. As the sun began to set, painting the Nevada sky in shades of orange and purple, Dinah built a fire in the stove to heat water for washing. Morris moved around the kitchen space with increasing confidence, figuring out where things should go, making it a home through sheer force of will. I should have asked before, Dinah said, watching her work. Can you cook? Morris laughed, the sound startling them both. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh, and it was a good sound, warm and genuine. I've been cooking meals for the Silver Star for 2 years. Yes, I can cook. Not fancy food, but decent and filling. That's all I need. He poured hot water into the basin for her. Your hand must be hurting. You should rest it. It hurts, she admitted, looking at the bandage Doc Henderson had applied, but not as bad as it could. That laudanum bottle is helping, just knowing I have it if I need it. They ate a simple supper of Sarah's bread and cold chicken, sitting at the rickety table as darkness fell outside. Dinah lit the oil lamp, and its warm glow made the cabin feel cozier, less like a derelict building and more like a home. When they'd finished eating, the elephant in the room could no longer be ignored. They were married, sharing a one-bedroom cabin, and night had fallen. Morris stood up and began clearing the dishes, moving with careful deliberation that told Dinah she was thinking about the same thing. Morris, he said gently, I want you to understand something. I know this marriage happened fast, and I know we barely know each other. I'm not expecting anything from you tonight except sleep. You're exhausted, you're hurt, and you've had one hell of a day. I'll sleep out here on the floor. You take the bedroom. She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the lamplight. You don't want to share the bed. Eventually, yes. But not tonight, not until you're ready. He stood up, moving to stand in front of her. I told you this could be a partnership, a business arrangement. I meant that. Anything more needs to happen naturally when we both want it. I'm not going to force anything. Morris studied his face for a long moment, and he let her look her fill, wanting her to see his sincerity. Finally, she nodded slowly. All right, but you shouldn't have to sleep on the floor in your own home. The bed is big enough for 2 people. We can share it just for sleeping. Are you sure? I'm sure. She managed a small smile. Besides, I've been sleeping alone in that storage room for 2 years. It might be nice to not be alone, even if it's just someone nearby. They prepared for bed with the awkwardness of 2 strangers trying to navigate new intimacy. Morris changed into a worn nightgown in the bedroom, while Dinah washed up at the basin and stripped down to his undershirt and trousers. When he entered the bedroom, she was already under the thin blanket, pressed close to one edge of the mattress to leave him plenty of room. He blew out the lamp and climbed in carefully, staying on his side of the bed. In the darkness, he could hear her breathing, quick and nervous at first, then gradually slowing as exhaustion claimed her. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breath evening out into the deep rhythm of genuine rest. Dinah lay awake longer, staring up at the dark ceiling and thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. This morning he'd been a cowhand with vague plans for the future. Tonight he was a married man with a wife sleeping beside him and a home to build. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt right, like pieces clicking into place. When he finally drifted off to sleep, it was with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, early morning sunlight streaming through the clean windows. Morris was already up and dressed, moving quietly around the kitchen space with her hair pinned up and her injured hand held carefully against her chest. She looked up when she heard him stirring, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Good morning. I hope I didn't wake you." "You didn't." Dinah sat up, running a hand through his hair. "How's your hand?" "Sore but manageable." She turned back to the stove, flipping the bacon with practiced ease. "I found eggs in the basket Sarah gave us. Thought I'd make a proper breakfast." He washed his face in the basin and pulled on his shirt and boots, then joined her at the table. She served him a plate of eggs and bacon with bread toasted on the stove, then sat down with her own smaller portion. The food was simple but perfectly prepared, and Dinah found himself impressed despite his claim not to care about fancy cooking. "This is good," he said between bites. "Really good." Morris ducked her head, pleased by the compliment. "Thank you. I figured if you're going to work all day, you need a solid breakfast." They ate together in comfortable silence, and Dinah found himself thinking how natural it felt, like they'd been doing this for years, instead of less than 24 hours. When they'd finished, he helped her wash the dishes, then headed out to report for work while Morris stayed behind to continue making the cabin livable. The day passed in the usual routine of ranch work, checking fences and moving cattle, but Dinah found his thoughts drifting to the cabin and the woman working there. When he broke for lunch, he rode back to check on her and found the cabin transformed. She'd somehow managed to repair the broken table leg, scrub the floors until they shone, and hang makeshift curtains in the windows made from old flour sacks she'd found in a storage shed. "You've been busy," he said, looking around in amazement. Morris wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a smudge of dirt behind. "I want it to be nice, for both of us." She gestured to the table where she'd laid out bread and cheese. "I saved you some lunch." They ate together, and Morris told him about her plans for a small vegetable garden behind the cabin, about the curtains she wanted to make, about all the ways she could improve their home. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Dinah found himself caught up in her vision, adding his own ideas about building a chicken coop and maybe a small barn eventually. When he had to go back to work, he found himself reluctant to leave. That evening, when he returned for good, Morris had supper waiting, a stew made from vegetables Sarah had given them and salt pork from the stores. They ate on the porch, watching the sun set over the Nevada hills, and talked about nothing and everything, getting to know each other in the easy way that good conversation allows. That night, they shared the bed again, still keeping to their respective sides but somehow a little less awkward than the night before. The third night, Dinah woke to find Morris curled against his side, seeking warmth in the cool desert night. He carefully put his arm around her, and she settled deeper into sleep without waking. The days fell into a rhythm that felt comfortable and right. Dinah worked the ranch during the day while Morris transformed their cabin into a real home. She proved to be remarkably resourceful, trading her skills for materials she needed, bartering with Sarah Jefferson and the other ranch wives for furniture and household goods. Word of their marriage had spread through Cherry Creek, and opinions were divided. Some people thought Dinah had made a terrible mistake, marrying beneath his station. Others admired him for seeing past social conventions to recognize Morris's worth. Dinah found he didn't much care either way. He was happy, and more importantly, Morris was thriving in a way that made his heart glad. She gained weight over those first weeks, the gauntness leaving her face as she ate regular meals. The fear in her eyes faded, replaced by contentment and growing confidence. She laughed more often, smiled more readily, and began to show the quick wit and sharp intelligence that had been buried under years of harsh treatment. They still hadn't consummated their marriage, and Dinah was content to let Morris set the pace. They were growing closer every day, learning each other's habits and preferences, building genuine affection alongside the practical partnership. He found himself looking forward to coming home each evening, to the sight of their cabin with smoke rising from the chimney and Morris waiting on the porch. It was about 6 weeks after their wedding when things changed. Dinah had been working late, helping deliver a difficult calf, and came home well after dark to find the cabin lit warmly from within. Morris met him at the door, and he could tell immediately that something was different. She'd taken particular care with her appearance, wearing her best dress and with her hair down around her shoulders instead of pinned up as usual. "Everything all right?" he asked, washing up at the basin. "Everything's fine." She moved to serve him supper, a particularly good meal of fried chicken and biscuits. "I just wanted to make tonight nice." They ate together, the conversation flowing easily as always, but Dinah sensed an undercurrent of nervous energy from Morris. When they'd finished and cleaned up, she took his hand and led him to the bedroom. "Dinah," she said softly, meeting his eyes in the lamplight, "I think I'm ready if you still want me." He cupped her face gently in his hands, looking down at this woman who'd become so important to him in such a short time. "Are you sure? There's no rush, I'm sure." She placed her hand over his heart and he could feel it racing. "You've been so patient with me, so kind. You've given me a home and respect and security. But more than that, I think I'm falling in love with you, and I want this marriage to be real in every way." Dinah kissed her then, gently at first and then with growing passion as she responded eagerly. They undressed each other slowly in the flickering lamplight, and he took great care to be gentle, especially conscious of her still healing hand. Morris was nervous but willing, and he did everything he could to make it good for her, to show her that intimacy could be tender and pleasurable rather than something to endure. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Morris's head on his chest and his arms around her. He could feel her trembling slightly, overwhelmed by emotion and new experience. "All right?" he asked softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Better than all right." Her voice was muffled against his chest. "I love you, Dinah Kane. I know it's fast, but I do. I love you too." He realized as he said it that it was completely true. Somewhere in the past 6 weeks, affection and respect had grown into genuine love. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Morris." She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining with tears in the lamplight. "No one's ever said anything like that to me before." "Then people are fools." He wiped away her tears with his thumb. "You're amazing, Morris. The way you've transformed this cabin, the way you work so hard, the way you've adapted to everything. I'm in awe of you." She kissed him then, deep and sweet, and their lovemaking the second time was even better than the first, both of them more confident and eager. They finally fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Dinah thought that this was what happiness felt like, this bone-deep contentment and sense of rightness. The seasons turned, autumn giving way to winter, and their small home remained warm and cozy despite the cold outside. Morris proved to be exactly what Dinah had claimed she would be, running their household with efficiency and skill that would put any society lady to shame. She managed their limited budget carefully, stretching every penny until it screamed, and somehow always had good food on the table and clean clothes for them both. She also proved to be popular with the other ranch wives, who quickly recognized her capability and welcomed her into their circle. Sarah Jefferson became a particular friend, and Dinah would often come home to find the two women working together on some project, their laughter carrying across the yard. In December, 3 months after their wedding, Morris told him she was pregnant. Dinah swept her up in his arms, careful of her belly, and spun her around in their small kitchen while she laughed and protested that he'd make her dizzy. "I'm going to be a father," he said wonderingly, setting her down gently. "You're going to be a wonderful father." Morris took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I can't wait to meet this baby, to give our child everything I never had. We will." Dinah pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I promise you, Morris. Our kids will never know what it's like to be hungry or scared or treated poorly. They'll grow up knowing they're loved and valued." That winter was one of the happiest times of Dinah's life. Despite the cold and the hard work, he went to bed every night with his wife in his arms and woke every morning to her smile. They talked late into the evenings about their future, about the ranch they'd start someday, about the children they'd raise. In March, when Morris was 5 months along and showing clearly, Dinah approached John Jefferson about buying land. He'd been saving carefully, and between his wages and Morris's careful household management, they had a decent amount put away. "There's a 100-acre parcel about 3 miles from here that might suit you," John said, unrolling a map on his desk. "Owners looking to sell, move back east. Good water, decent grazing. I could talk to him if you're interested." "I'm interested." Dinah studied the map, his mind already working through possibilities. "I'd need to keep working here while I built it up, but if I could start running a few head of my own cattle on it, we can work something out." John smiled. "You've been a good hand, Dinah. I'd hate to lose you entirely, but I understand a man wanting his own place. Let me make some inquiries." 2 weeks later, Dinah and Morris rode out to look at the property. It was beautiful, rolling grassland with a small creek running through it and a stand of cottonwoods providing shade. Morris stood in the middle of it, turning slowly to take it all in, one hand on her swelling belly. "This is it," she said softly. "This is where we build our real home." They made an offer that was accepted, and by April they owned their first piece of land. It would be years before they could afford to build a proper house on it or stock it fully with cattle. But it was theirs, paid for free and clear, a foundation for the future they were building together. Morris's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and she remained active and cheerful despite the discomforts. The other ranch wives fussed over her, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, making her feel part of their community in a way she'd never experienced before. In late June 1883, on a sweltering Nevada afternoon, Morris went into labor. Sarah Jefferson came to stay with her while Dinah rode to town for the doctor, his heart in his throat the whole way. By the time he returned with Doc Henderson, Morris was deep in labor, working with fierce determination to bring their child into the world. Dinah waited outside with John Jefferson, pacing the length of the porch over and over while the sun set and rose again. Finally, in the early morning hours, he heard the thin wail of a newborn baby. Sarah emerged minutes later, tired but smiling. "You have a son," she announced, "and Morris did beautifully. She's asking for you." Dinah went inside to find his wife propped up on pillows, exhausted and sweaty but glowing with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle, red-faced and squalling with a shock of dark hair. Morris looked up as he approached, tears streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she said softly. "I thought we could name him Daniel, if you like, after my father." Dinah sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the impossibly small person they'd created together. "Daniel Kane," he said, testing the name. "It's perfect." He reached out tentatively to touch the baby's tiny hand, and Daniel's fingers immediately curled around his larger one with surprising strength. The love that flooded through Dinah in that moment was overwhelming, fierce and protective, and all-consuming. "He's perfect," Dinah said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're perfect. Thank you for this, Morris, for everything. We did this together." Morris shifted the baby so Dinah could hold him, carefully transferring the precious bundle. "This is just the beginning of our family." Daniel turned out to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping well and eating heartily. Morris took to motherhood with the same competence she brought to everything else, though Dinah could see the toll it took on her, the exhaustion of caring for a newborn on top of all her other responsibilities. He did what he could to help, taking the baby in the evenings so Morris could rest, walking Daniel around the cabin when he fussed, changing diapers with fumbling but determined hands. The other cowboys teased him for being soft, but he didn't care. This was his family, and he was going to be present for all of it. By the time Daniel was 6 months old, they'd saved enough to buy their first small herd of cattle, 10 head that they moved onto their property. Dinah worked longer hours now, splitting his time between the Double J and their own growing operation, but he made sure to be home for supper every night, to spend time with Morris and Daniel before bed. Morris proved to be as capable at ranching as she was at everything else. She couldn't do the heavy physical labor, especially with a baby to care for, but she kept meticulous records of their expenses and income, managed their breeding program, and made smart decisions about when to buy and sell. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. The second winter was harder than the first, with heavy snows that made work difficult and kept them confined to the cabin for days at a time. But Dinah found he didn't mind. The cabin was warm and cozy, filled with the sounds of Daniel's laughter and Morris's singing as she worked. He'd sit by the fire in the evenings with his son on his lap while Morris mended clothes or knitted, and feel a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life," Morris said one evening, looking up from the sock she was darning. 2 years ago I was sleeping in a storage room and eating scraps. Now I have a home and a husband and a son. It doesn't seem real. It's real." Dinah reached over to take her hand, twining their fingers together. "And it's only going to get better. We're building something here, Morris, something that will last." By the spring of 1884, their herd had grown to 20 head, and they were starting to turn a small profit. Dinah had cut back his hours at the Double J, spending more time on their own place. They hired a young hand to help with the heavy work, a quiet boy named Tommy who reminded Dinah of himself a few years earlier. Morris was pregnant again, due in late autumn, and this time she was less nervous about it. She knew what to expect, and she had a supportive community around her. Dinah watched her bloom in her second pregnancy, her confidence and happiness evident in everything she did. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Morris's mother, was born in November during an early snowstorm. The labor was faster than Daniel's had been, and Doc Henderson barely made it in time. Margaret had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and from the first moment she stole both their hearts completely. "2 babies under 2, Morris said with a tired laugh, looking at Daniel playing on the floor while she nursed Margaret. "We certainly didn't waste any time building our family. No complaints from me." Dinah sat down beside her, pulling Daniel onto his lap. "This is exactly what I wanted, a full house and a happy wife." The years that followed were busy and productive. Their ranch grew steadily, and by 1886 they had 50 head of cattle and had built a proper barn and chicken coop. They'd also started construction on a new house on their property, a real home with 3 bedrooms and a separate kitchen. It would take years to complete working on it bit by bit as time and money allowed, but every nail Dinah drove felt like an investment in their future. Morris had become a respected member of the Cherry Creek community, known for her competence and kindness. The women who had once looked down on her as a mere serving girl now sought her advice and valued her friendship. She served on the church committee and organized fundraisers for the school, her intelligence and organizational skills making her invaluable. Dinah found it deeply satisfying to see his wife receive the respect she deserved. Sometimes he'd watch her at church socials or town meetings, holding her own in conversations with women who'd once sneered at her, and feel a surge of pride that nearly overwhelmed him. In the summer of 1887, 5 years after their wedding, they moved into their completed house. It was a beautiful structure of wood and stone, with glass windows and proper wooden floors, a far cry from the drafty cabin where they'd started. Morris cried when she walked through it for the first time fully furnished, overcome by emotion at how far they'd come. "Remember when you first brought me to that old cabin," she said, standing in their new living room with Margaret on her hip and Daniel clinging to her skirts. "I thought it was wonderful then, but this is beyond anything I ever dreamed of. You made it happen." Dinah came to stand beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Your careful management, your hard work, your smart decisions. This house is as much yours as it is mine. More, probably." That evening, after the children were in bed, they sat on their new porch and watched the sunset paint the Nevada sky in brilliant colors. Morris leaned against Dinah's shoulder and he held her close, thinking about all they'd accomplished together. "You ever regret it?" Morris asked quietly. "Marrying me so impulsively, tying yourself to someone from my background? Never, not for one single second." He turned to look at her, wanting her to see the sincerity in his eyes. "You're the best partner I could have asked for, Morris. You run our home better than any fine lady could have, just like I knew you would. You've given me children and love and a life worth living. How could I possibly regret that? I love you," she said simply. "More than I can ever express. You saved me, Dinah, gave me a life when I had nothing. We saved each other." He kissed her gently. "And we built this life together, every step of the way." By 1888, their ranch had grown to over 100 head of cattle, making them one of the more prosperous smaller operations in the area. Dinah had hired 2 permanent hands to help with the work, and they'd built a small bunkhouse for them to live in. Their home was comfortable and well-appointed, with furniture Morris had carefully selected, and curtains she'd sewn herself. Daniel, now 5 years old, was a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, already learning the basics of ranch work. Margaret, at nearly 4, was more reserved but showed signs of her mother's intelligence and practical nature. They were good kids, well-behaved and happy, growing up secure in the knowledge that they were loved and valued. Morris had blossomed into the woman Dinah had always known she could be, confident and capable, respected by everyone who knew her. She still worked harder than most women, taking an active role in running the ranch alongside managing the household. But she did it with joy rather than desperation. The fear and exhaustion that had shadowed her eyes when they first met had long since vanished, replaced by contentment and genuine happiness. In September of 1888, Morris told Dinah she was pregnant again. They were both delighted, though Morris joked that at 28 she was getting too old to be chasing after babies. Their third child, a son they named David, was born in May of 1889, a healthy baby with his father's blue eyes and a peaceful temperament. The 1890s brought new challenges and opportunities. Cherry Creek continued to grow, the silver mine still producing enough to keep the town prosperous. The Kane Ranch grew with it, expanding to 300 acres as they bought up adjacent parcels. They built a new barn and added sheep to their operation, diversifying their income streams. Dinah had long since stopped working for anyone else, devoting all his time to their ranch. Morris continued to manage the household and financial records, her careful stewardship ensuring they prospered even in difficult years. They made a formidable team, respected by their neighbors and valued members of their community. Daniel grew into a responsible young man, taking on more ranch work as he got older. Margaret proved to have a gift with animals, particularly horses, and spent hours training and working with their growing herd. David was still young but showed signs of his father's practical nature and his mother's intelligence. In 1893, Morris's friend Sarah Jefferson died suddenly of a fever, leaving John Jefferson a widower with 3 grown children. It hit Morris hard, the loss of the woman who had been so kind to her from the beginning, who had welcomed her when others scorned her. She grieved deeply but also stepped up to help the Jefferson family, bringing food and offering support in the way Sarah had once done for her. The loss reminded them both of how precious life was, how quickly it could change. That winter, sitting by their fire with their children around them, Dinah looked at Morris across the room and felt a rush of gratitude so strong it brought tears to his eyes. She was 44 years old now, with silver threading through her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes, and she was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "What are you thinking about?" Morris asked, noticing his gaze. "How lucky I am." He reached out his hand and she took it, coming to sit beside him on the sofa. "How a split-second decision 12 years ago gave me everything I have. It gave me everything too." Morris leaned her head on his shoulder. "I was so scared that day, standing on those saloon steps bleeding and not knowing what to do. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I'd been too tired to say. We've built a good life together, the best life." She looked around their comfortable home, at their children reading by the fireplace, at the evidence of years of love and hard work surrounding them. "I sometimes think about that girl in the storage room and it feels like a different person, like that couldn't possibly have been me. It was you. But you were never really that girl. You were always this person, strong and capable and amazing. You just needed a chance to show it." The years continued to roll by, bringing the changes that time always brings. Daniel married a neighbor girl in 1898 and brought his bride to live on the ranch, building a small house on the property for them. Margaret married a young veterinarian from Carson City in 1900 and moved away, though she visited often. David was still at home, now a teenager working alongside his father and brother to keep the ranch running. Morris and Dinah were in their 50s now, their hair more gray than not, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work. But they were still strong and capable, still deeply in love, still partners in every sense of the word. They'd weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses, and come through it all with their love intact and their family thriving. In 1902, 20 years after their wedding, they celebrated their anniversary with a large party at their ranch. It seemed like everyone in Cherry Creek came, testament to how far they'd come from that scandalous marriage between a cowboy and a serving girl. People raised their glasses to toast the Kane family, and multiple speakers talked about Dinah and Morris's hard work and contribution to the community. When it was Dinah's turn to speak, he stood with his arm around Morris and looked out at the crowd of friends and neighbors. 20 years ago, I made the best decision of my life when I asked this woman to marry me. She was working herself to death in a saloon, treated like she was worth less than nothing. But I saw what everyone else was too blind to see, that she was worth more than all the so-called respectable women in town put together. He turned to Morris, taking both her hands in his. "You've run our home better than any fine lady could have. You've raised 3 amazing children. You've built a successful ranch alongside me, making smart decisions that saved us more times than I can count. You've been my partner, my lover, my best friend. I couldn't have asked for more from this life." Morris was crying openly now, and half the women in the crowd were crying with her. "I love you," she said simply. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for giving me a chance when everyone else had written me off. Thank you for this beautiful life." They kissed to thunderous applause, and the party continued late into the night. Later, lying in bed together in the room they'd shared for 2 decades, Morris traced patterns on Dinah's chest with her finger. "You really think I've done well?" she asked quietly. "Run our home well, I mean. Morris, you've done more than well. You've been extraordinary." He caught her hand and brought it to his lips. "Better than I ever imagined, better than I had any right to hope for. You took a broken-down cabin and turned it into a home. You took our small savings and managed them so carefully we built a successful ranch. You raised our children to be good, capable people. What more could anyone ask? I just wanted to make you proud, to prove that your faith in me wasn't misplaced. You've proved that 1,000 times over." He pulled her close, and she settled against him with the comfortable familiarity of decades together. "I'm so proud of you, Morris, of everything you've accomplished, everything you are. I hope you know that." "I know." She kissed his chest softly. "And I'm proud of us, of what we built together." That scared girl and the cowboy who took a chance on her, look what they created. The years after their anniversary celebration continued peacefully. Daniel and his wife gave them 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl, who became frequent visitors to the main house. Margaret had a daughter and visited several times a year from Carson City. David, now in his 20s, had taken over much of the day-to-day ranch management, allowing Dinah to slow down slightly. Morris, now in her mid-50s, remained active and engaged despite her age. She'd taken up quilting and was creating beautiful pieces that she sold at church fundraisers. She continued to manage the household finances with the same careful attention she'd always brought to it, ensuring their continued prosperity. She'd also become something of a mentor to younger women in Cherry Creek, offering advice and support, particularly to those in difficult circumstances. In 1905, they received word that the Silver Star Saloon was being torn down to make way for a new bank building. Morris and Dinah rode into town to watch the demolition, standing side by side as the building that had once been her prison came crashing down. "How does it feel?" Dinah asked, his arm around her waist. "Like closing a chapter of a book I read a long time ago." Morris watched the walls collapse with calm eyes. "I'm not that person anymore. I haven't been for 23 years, but I'm glad to see it go. Maybe whoever builds on that land will create something better, something that brings happiness instead of misery." They rode home slowly, talking about their early days together, laughing at how scared they'd both been, how uncertain of what they were doing. By the time they reached their ranch, the sun was setting, painting everything in golden light. Their house stood solid and beautiful, smoke rising from the chimney. The barn and outbuildings were well maintained, the corrals full of healthy livestock. The land stretched out in all directions, 300 acres of home that they'd built from nothing through years of hard work and love. "Not bad for a cowboy and a serving girl," Morris said softly, taking it all in. "Not bad at all." Dinah helped her down from her horse, then wrapped his arms around her, just holding her close. "We did good, Morris. Real good." In 1907, Margaret's husband died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving her a widow with a young daughter. She returned home to Cherry Creek, moving back to the ranch while she figured out her next steps. Morris was grateful to have her daughter close again, and the two women grew even closer as they navigated Margaret's grief together. Margaret eventually decided to stay in Cherry Creek, opening a small dress shop in town. She never remarried, content with her daughter and her work and the support of her family. Morris was proud of her daughter's independence and strength, seeing echoes of her own journey in Margaret's determination to build a life on her own terms. The years rolled on, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, good years and difficult ones, the normal progression of a life well lived. Dinah and Morris grew old together, their bodies slowing down but their love remaining as strong as ever. They still shared the same bed they'd slept in for over 25 years, still talked late into the night about everything and nothing, still found joy in each other's company. In the spring of 1910, as they were preparing for their 28th anniversary, Dinah had a mild heart attack while working in the barn. Morris was with him when it happened, supporting him as he sank to the ground, shouting for David and the ranch hands to get the doctor. Doc Henderson, now an old man himself, examined Dinah carefully and prescribed rest and reduced activity. Dinah grumbled about being forced to slow down, but Morris was having none of it. "You're 68 years old," she told him firmly, her hands on her hips. "You've worked hard your entire life. It's time to let David and the hands take on more of the physical labor. I need you around for a good long while yet, Dinah Kane, so you're going to follow doctor's orders." He recovered slowly, frustrated by his body's limitations but secretly grateful for more time to spend with Morris. They sat on their porch for hours, watching the ranch operate around them, talking about their lives and their children and their memories. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't asked you to marry me that day?" Dinah asked one afternoon, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in brilliant colors. "Sometimes." Morris was knitting, her needles clicking rhythmically. "I think I probably would have died in that saloon eventually, worked myself to death or had an accident like that cut on my hand but worse. I wasn't going to last much longer, Dinah. I was at the end of my rope. I'm so glad I saw you that morning, so glad I had the courage to act. Me too." She set down her knitting and moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in both of hers. "You saved my life. But more than that, you gave me a life worth living. You saw value in me when no one else did. You gave me respect and dignity and love. How can I ever thank you enough for that? You've thanked me every day for 28 years just by being you, by loving me, by building this life with me, by being the most amazing partner a man could ask for." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing each knuckle gently. "I love you, Morris Kane, more now than ever. I love you too." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the hills and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. In August of 1912, 30 years after their wedding, they celebrated with another large party. This time it included children, grandchildren, and several great-grandchildren, 3 generations of family that had sprung from that impulsive decision 30 years earlier. The celebration lasted 2 days, with people camping on their property and food enough to feed an army. On the second evening, when things were winding down, Dinah and Morris slipped away from the crowd to walk along their property line. They moved slowly now, both in their late 60s and feeling their age, but they walked hand in hand like they had so many times over the decades. 30 years, Morris said wonderingly. "It seems like forever and no time at all. I know what you mean." Dinah stopped at the creek that ran through their property, the same creek that had drawn them to this land all those years ago. "If I could go back and do it all over again, I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even marrying a serving girl everyone looked down on," especially not that. He turned to face her, cupping her face in his weathered hands. That serving girl became the most remarkable woman I've ever known. She ran our home better than any fine lady could have dreamed of. She raised 3 incredible children. She helped build a ranch that's the envy of the county. She earned the respect of everyone who knows her through her character and capability. How could I possibly regret that? Morris's eyes filled with tears. Even after 30 years, she still sometimes struggled to believe she deserved the life they'd built. I was so scared that day. When you asked me to marry you, I thought maybe you were crazy or maybe I was dreaming. It seemed impossible that anyone would want me. I wanted you then and I want you now. That hasn't changed in 30 years and it never will. He kissed her softly, a gentle press of lips that still made her heart flutter. You're mine, Morris, and I'm yours, forever. They walked back to the party hand in hand. 2 old people who'd built something lasting and beautiful from the most unlikely beginning. Their children and grandchildren greeted them with hugs and laughter, pulling them into the ongoing celebration. Later that night, lying in their bed with Morris asleep beside him, Dinah reflected on the journey they'd taken together. From that morning at the Silver Star Saloon to this moment, with generations of family celebrating around them, it had been an incredible ride. There had been hard times and good times, struggles and triumphs, but through it all they'd had each other. Morris stirred in her sleep, instinctively moving closer to him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. This woman who'd been nothing when he met her, who society had deemed worthless, had proved to be worth more than anyone could have imagined. She'd been his partner in every sense of the word, contributing as much to their success as he had, maybe more. The morning after their anniversary celebration, they woke early and sat on their porch drinking coffee as the ranch came to life around them. David was organizing the hands for the day's work. Daniel and his family were packing up to head back to their own house on the property. Margaret was helping clean up from the party while her daughter played with the younger grandchildren. We did good, didn't we? Morris asked, watching their family with contentment clear on her face. We did better than good. We did great. Dinah took her hand, lacing their fingers together. 3 kids who turned out wonderful, a ranch that's thriving, a family that's close and loving. What more could we ask for? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. She squeezed his hand. I have everything I ever dreamed of and more than I ever thought possible. All because a cowboy took a chance on a serving girl nobody respected. And that serving girl proved she could run a home better than any fine lady ever could. They sat together in companionable silence, watching the sun climb higher in the Nevada sky. The heat would be oppressive by afternoon, but right now the morning was pleasant, with a slight breeze keeping things comfortable. Dinah thought about everything they'd overcome, all the obstacles they'd faced, the initial scandal of their marriage, the years of building their ranch from nothing, the economic downturns and natural disasters that had threatened their livelihood, the illnesses and injuries and losses that were part of any life. They'd weathered it all together, their bond growing stronger with each challenge they overcame. You remember that first night in the cabin? Morris asked, her thoughts apparently running along similar lines. How awkward we were, trying to figure out how to share a bed without making things weird. Dinah laughed. I remember thinking I'd made a huge mistake, that we'd never be able to make it work. We were basically strangers. But we did make it work. Morris turned to look at him, her dark eyes still beautiful despite the wrinkles around them. We learned each other, got to know each other, fell in love. It wasn't instant, but it was real. The best things rarely happen instantly. He lifted her hand to his lips. Building something that lasts takes time and effort and commitment. We put in all 3, and look what we got. As the morning wore on, Their children and grandchildren began saying their goodbyes, heading back to their own homes and responsibilities. Each one stopped to hug Dinah and Morris, thanking them for the celebration and expressing love and appreciation. By noon, the house was quiet again, just the two of them and David, who lived in the small house behind the main building. Morris started to clean up, but Dinah stopped her. "Leave it for now. Come sit with me." They spent the afternoon on the porch, reading and talking, enjoying the peace after 2 days of celebration. Morris read from the Bible while Dinah dozed in his chair, the comfortable routine of an old married couple. As the sun began to set, Morris set aside her reading and just watched the play of light across the land they owned. "I'm grateful," she said softly, "for all of it, even the hard parts because they made the good parts sweeter. I'm grateful I lived long enough to see our children grown and settled. I'm grateful for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I'm grateful that we've had 30 years together. However much longer we get, it's all blessing." "Don't talk like you're dying," Dinah said, though he understood what she meant. They were both getting old, and the reality was that their time together, however precious, was finite. "I'm not planning on going anywhere anytime soon," Morris assured him. "But I want you to know, while I can say it clearly, how thankful I am. You gave me a life, Dinah. Not just survival, but a real life full of love and purpose and meaning. That's a gift beyond price." The years after their 30th anniversary were peaceful and productive. Dinah recovered from his heart attack, though he remained less active than he'd been before. Morris continued to manage the household and provide guidance to David on the ranch finances. They settled into a comfortable rhythm, enjoying their grandchildren and the fruits of decades of hard work. In 1915, as World War I raged in Europe, they celebrated their 33rd anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their immediate family. Dinah was 73 now, Morris 65, and they'd both slowed down considerably. But their minds remained sharp, and their love as strong as ever. They spent more time together now, Dinah having largely retired from ranch work. They'd sit on the porch for hours, holding hands and watching the world go by, or read together in the evenings by the fire. Sometimes they'd take slow walks around their property, pointing out changes and improvements, reminiscing about the early days when it was just the two of them and a dream. One evening in late summer, as they sat watching the sunset, Morris leaned her head against Dinah's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, the question so familiar after decades of marriage that it was almost a ritual. "How far we've come. That girl in the saloon and the cowboy who saved her. All the years in between, all the love and work and joy. I couldn't have imagined any of this back then. I didn't dare dream this big. You deserved all of it and more." Dinah kissed the top of her head. "You worked for every bit of happiness we have. You earned it through your character and your capability and your love. We earned it together." Morris took his hand, holding it between both of hers. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. You were my foundation, my support, my partner in everything. We built this life together, Dinah. Every beautiful piece of it." They sat together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, two old people who'd built something lasting and beautiful from the most unlikely beginning. They'd proved that love and hard work could overcome any obstacle, that respect and partnership were the foundation of a successful marriage, that a serving girl nobody respected could run a home better than any fine lady if given the chance. Their story had become something of a legend in Cherry Creek, told to young couples as an example of what was possible when two people committed fully to each other. Dinah and Morris had become pillars of their community, respected and valued by everyone who knew them. The scandal of their hasty marriage had long since been forgotten, replaced by admiration for what they'd accomplished together. As Dinah looked at his wife in the fading light, he felt a surge of love so strong it almost hurt. This woman, who'd had every reason to become bitter and defeated, had instead become one of the strongest, most capable people he'd ever known. She'd taken every challenge and turned it into an opportunity. She'd built a home and a family and a life that was the envy of everyone who saw it. "I love you, Morris Kane," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I have words to express. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too." Morris lifted her face for his kiss, and he obliged her, pressing his lips to hers with all the tenderness of decades of devotion. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for this life. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on a crazy cowboy with a wild idea. Thank you for being my partner in everything." He held her close, feeling her heart beat against his chest. "Whatever time we have left, I want to spend every moment of it with you." "That sounds perfect to me." They sat together as full darkness fell, the stars bright overhead in the clear Nevada sky. Inside their house, lamps were being lit, casting warm light through the windows. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, but tonight they had each other, and that was enough. It had always been enough, from that first awkward night in a broken-down cabin to this moment on the porch of the house they'd built together. Dinah Kane and Morris Foster, the cowboy and the serving girl, had proved everyone wrong. They'd built a life together that was rich and full and meaningful, raised a family that was loving and successful, earned respect through their character and capabilities. Morris had run their home better than any fine lady could have imagined, managing everything with skill and grace and determination. And through it all, they'd loved each other with a devotion that only deepened with time, a partnership that was as strong in their old age as it had been in their youth. They'd taken a chance on each other that September day in 1882, and they'd spent every day since proving that it was the best decision either of them ever made. As they finally rose from their chairs and made their way into the house, Dinah took one last look around at their ranch, at the life they'd built from nothing but hope and hard work and love. It was a good life, a beautiful life, and he wouldn't change a single moment of it. He'd married a serving girl nobody respected, and she'd given him everything that mattered: love, family, partnership, and a home that was built on a foundation strong enough to last generations. And that, he thought as he closed the door behind them, was the very best kind of happy ending.